Chosen one, your enemies thought they had forever to hide what they did to you. But heaven has started a countdown they cannot stop. Right now, behind the scenes, the truth is rising and the people who tried to delay your destiny are beginning to panic. Something is about to be exposed that will completely change how people see your story. So stay with me until the end of this message, because what God is about to reveal next will show you exactly why your enemies are running out of time. Chosen one, there is something happening in the spiritual realm right now that many people around you cannot see, cannot understand, and cannot explain, but you can feel it deep in your spirit, because when God places His hand on someone's life, the atmosphere around them begins to change in ways that even their enemies cannot control, and this is exactly why the people who tried to delay you, discourage you, betray you, and secretly work against you are beginning to feel an unusual pressure that they cannot escape from, because the time they once had to manipulate situations, spread lies, and hide behind masks is quietly running out, and while they may still pretend everything is normal on the outside, inside they know that something has shifted and that the season they relied on is coming to an end. You must understand something very important about your journey, chosen one, because nothing that happened to you was random, nothing you experienced was an accident, and nothing you lost happened without heaven noticing it. Even in the moments when you felt abandoned, misunderstood, or completely alone, God was watching every detail, every conversation that took place behind your back, every hidden plan that was formed in secret rooms, and every false narrative that was spoken to damage your name. And while people thought their actions would never be exposed, heaven was quietly recording everything, waiting for the exact moment when truth would rise and deception would collapse under the weight of its own lies. There were times when you wondered why certain people suddenly turned against you without explanation, why relationships that once seemed genuine suddenly became cold and distant, and why doors that should have opened for you appeared to close without reason. But what you did not see in that moment was the spiritual battle that was unfolding around your destiny, because when someone carries a calling from God, they automatically become a target for jealousy, manipulation, and spiritual resistance, and the enemy will often use people who appear close to you to create confusion, delay, and emotional pain in order to weaken your faith and push you away from the path that heaven prepared for you long before you were even born. But here is the truth that your enemies failed to understand about you, chosen one, and it is the same truth that is now beginning to terrify them, because they thought they were dealing with an ordinary person, someone who would eventually break under pressure, someone who would become bitter, angry, and spiritually disconnected after facing betrayal and rejection, but they underestimated the protection that surrounds a chosen life, and they underestimated the power of God to defend the people He has appointed for a purpose greater than human understanding. Every time they tried to block you, God created another way. Every time they attempted to silence your voice, God strengthened your spirit, and every time they believed they had successfully delayed your progress, heaven was already preparing a reversal that would shock everyone who thought your story was finished. And now that reversal is beginning to unfold in ways that your enemies cannot stop and cannot escape from. Because divine timing does not operate according to human schedules, and when God decides that a season has ended, no person on earth can extend it any longer. Right now there are individuals who secretly watch your life, trying to understand how you continue moving forward despite everything that was done to you, because they know the role they played in the challenges you faced, and they expected your faith to collapse under the weight of those experiences, but instead they see you still standing, still growing, and still moving toward the destiny they tried to sabotage. And this reality is creating a level of fear and frustration inside them that they cannot hide forever. The reason they are running out of time is not because of something you are doing, but because of something God is about to do, and when heaven begins to intervene in a situation, the truth starts revealing itself in ways that no human plan can control. Hidden conversations begin to surface, secret alliances begin to fall apart, and the people who once worked together in darkness start turning against each other because the pressure of divine exposure becomes too heavy to carry. You may not see all of this happening yet, but the shift has already started, and many of the individuals who participated in trying to damage your reputation or delay your progress are beginning to realize that the narrative they created about you cannot survive much longer, because truth has a way of rising to the surface no matter how deeply someone tries to bury it, and once that truth begins to emerge, the same people who spoke confidently against you will suddenly become quiet, distant, and uncomfortable whenever your name is mentioned. What they do not realize is that this is only the beginning of the restoration that God has prepared for you, because whenever a chosen person goes through a season of betrayal and hidden attacks, heaven always prepares a season of public vindication that restores not only their peace but also their reputation, their opportunities, and the doors that were unfairly closed against them, and when that moment arrives it becomes impossible for anyone to deny that something supernatural has taken place. Many people around you believed the lies that were spoken about you simply because they did not know the full story, and unfortunately this is how manipulation often spreads, because when false information is repeated enough times it begins to appear believable to those who never take the time to seek the truth. But what these people do not understand is that God does not allow a chosen life to remain permanently buried under deception, and sooner or later the truth begins to reveal itself, piece by piece, until the entire picture becomes impossible to ignore. This is the stage your life is quietly approaching right now, chosen one, the moment when everything that was hidden begins to move toward exposure, and the individuals who once felt safe behind secrecy begin to realize that their protection is disappearing faster than they expected, because the same God who allowed you to endure silence for a season is now preparing to speak on your behalf in ways that no one will be able to dismiss or deny. For a long time your enemies believed they had control over the outcome of your story. They believed that their influence, their connections, and their carefully crafted narratives would permanently limit what you could become. But they forgot one very important truth, and that truth is that when God writes a destiny over someone's life, no human interference can erase it, delay it forever, or replace it with something smaller than what heaven originally planned. This is why the pressure is now shifting away from you and moving toward them, because the same situations they once used to intimidate you are now becoming reminders that their time to hide is almost finished, and as this realization grows stronger inside them, their behavior will begin to change in ways that may seem confusing at first. Some will suddenly attempt to reconnect with you, others will try to act as if nothing ever happened, and a few may even attempt to shift blame onto someone else in order to protect themselves from the consequences that are approaching. But you must remain calm, observant, and spiritually grounded during this transition, because when God begins exposing hidden agendas, emotions can run high and unexpected revelations can surface quickly, and the most powerful response you can have in that moment is quiet confidence, knowing that the truth does not need anger or revenge to defend itself, because once divine justice begins unfolding, every lie eventually collapses under its own weight. Your responsibility in this season is not to chase vindication or force people to admit what they did, because God has a way of revealing things in a manner that reaches far deeper than anything human confrontation could accomplish, and when heaven chooses the moment of exposure, it often happens in front of the very people who once believed the false narrative, creating a shift in perception that restores your credibility without you having to say a single word. That is why you should not be discouraged if the full picture has not appeared yet, because divine timing is precise, and God never reveals something before the moment when it will create the greatest transformation, and when that moment arrives, the same people who once doubted you will begin to question everything they were told, realizing that the person they misunderstood was never the problem at all. Meanwhile, your enemies continue feeling the pressure of a countdown they cannot stop, because deep inside they sense that their control over the narrative is slipping away day by day, and the closer the truth comes to the surface, the more restless and uneasy they become, knowing that the season of secrecy they depended on is reaching its final moments. And while all of this unfolds behind the scenes, God is also preparing something even greater for your future, because the purpose of exposure is not simply to reveal what was done against you, but to clear the path for the blessings, opportunities, and divine assignments that were waiting for the right moment to appear in your life. And once those doors begin opening, you will realize that every delay you experienced was actually positioning you for a level of favor that could not have been released any earlier. So do not lose focus now, chosen one, because the same patience that carried you through the season of confusion will now carry you into the season of clarity, and the same faith that kept you standing when everything seemed unfair will soon become the testimony that inspires others who are walking through similar battles, proving that no matter how carefully someone plans against a chosen life, they cannot outrun the moment when God decides that the truth must finally be seen. Your enemies may still believe they have time left to control the situation, but heaven's clock is already moving toward a moment they cannot delay, and when that moment arrives, the shift will be undeniable, the truth will become visible, and the story they tried to write about you will be replaced by the story God was writing all along, a story where betrayal could not destroy you, deception could not silence you, and opposition could not stop the destiny that was placed on your life long before your enemies even knew your name. Chosen one, the truth that many people around you still fail to understand is that time is one of the most powerful instruments God uses to reveal truth, correct injustice, and expose hidden motives, and while it may have seemed like your enemies had unlimited time to operate in secret, manipulate situations, and hide their true intentions, heaven has always been operating on a completely different timeline, a timeline where every action eventually meets its consequence, and every lie eventually collides with the truth that was patiently waiting for the right moment to rise. For a long period in your life, it probably felt like silence surrounded the things that were done against you, as if the universe itself was ignoring the pain, confusion, and betrayal you experienced, but what you could not see in those quiet seasons was that God was allowing time to do its work, allowing people to reveal their true character through their own actions, and allowing situations to develop in a way that would make the truth impossible to deny once it finally came into the light. The individuals who worked against you believed that your silence meant weakness, they believed your patience meant defeat, and they believed that if enough time passed people would simply forget what really happened, leaving their version of the story to become the accepted narrative. But what they never realized is that silence is often the very space where God prepares the most powerful reversals. Because when a chosen person refuses to fight back through bitterness or revenge, heaven begins preparing a response that carries far greater authority than anything human anger could produce. This is why the atmosphere around your life is beginning to shift now in ways that even your enemies cannot fully explain, because the same time they once relied on to protect their secrets is now becoming the force that is slowly uncovering them, piece by piece, layer by layer, until the entire structure of deception they built starts collapsing under its own weight. There are conversations happening behind closed doors right now where your name is being mentioned again, but not in the same way it was mentioned before, because the people who once repeated accusations and rumors about you are beginning to notice inconsistencies in the story they were told, and as questions begin to rise in their minds, the confidence that your enemies once had in their narrative is slowly turning into anxiety and uncertainty. Some of them are realizing that the version of you they were encouraged to believe never truly matched the reality they observed, and this realization creates a silent conflict inside them because they now understand that they may have participated in spreading something that was never completely true, and as this awareness grows stronger, their willingness to defend the lies spoken about you begins. Meanwhile, the individuals who were directly responsible for orchestrating the attacks against you can feel the pressure building in ways that are becoming harder to ignore, because every day that passes brings them closer to a moment when the truth may appear in a place they cannot control, and this uncertainty is something they never prepared for, because when they first began working against you they assumed their influence, their connections, and their secrecy would protect them indefinitely. But the spiritual reality they fail to consider is that when someone interferes with the life of a person who is chosen by God, they are not simply dealing with human circumstances anymore, they are stepping into a conflict with divine authority, and divine authority does not operate according to the same rules that protect human manipulation. This is why their confidence is slowly turning into fear, because the closer heaven moves toward exposing the truth, the more unpredictable the situation becomes for them, and people who once seemed united in their efforts against you may begin distancing themselves from each other in order to avoid being associated with the consequences that are approaching. You might notice subtle signs of this shift if you pay close attention. Certain individuals who once avoided you may suddenly become polite or overly friendly, others may attempt to casually check how you are doing as if they are trying to measure whether you know more than they expected, and a few may even attempt to rebuild communication in ways that seem strangely timed after a long period of silence. These reactions are not random. They are signs that the spiritual pressure surrounding the truth is beginning to affect the people who were once comfortable hiding behind deception, because when God begins to move in a situation, the atmosphere changes in ways that force hidden things to the surface whether people are ready for it or not. But in the middle of all this shifting energy, your role remains the same as it has always been, and that role is to continue moving forward with the quiet strength and faith that carried you through the earlier seasons of confusion and betrayal, because the greatest mistake you could make right now would be allowing the behavior of your enemies to distract you from the path that God has placed in front of you. Your destiny was never dependent on their approval, their opinions, or their ability to control circumstances around you, and the progress you are about to experience will not come because they suddenly change their attitudes. It will come because heaven has decided that your season of delay has reached its limit. There is something powerful about the moment when God decides that enough time has passed, because when that moment arrives, events begin aligning with a precision that human planning could never achieve. Doors that remained closed for years suddenly begin opening without resistance. Opportunities appear from places you never expected, and the same people who once doubted your potential begin witnessing the transformation that they secretly hoped would never happen. And when that shift becomes visible, the pressure on your enemies intensifies even more, because success has a way of exposing the truth about past opposition, and as your life begins moving forward with new momentum, the contrast between the lies spoken about you and the reality of who you are becomes impossible for others to ignore. This is the stage where many people who once believed negative stories about you begin re-evaluating their assumptions, realizing that the person they were warned about does not match the person they now see standing in front of them, and this quiet awakening becomes one of the most powerful forms of vindication you could ever experience. You will not need to chase validation or defend your past, because your present will begin speaking louder than anything your enemies once said, and the consistency of your character, your resilience, and your faith will slowly rewrite the narrative that others tried to create about your life. At the same time, the people who initiated the attacks against you will find themselves running out of explanations, because the story they told others can only survive as long as the evidence around it appears believable, and once your life begins reflecting growth, peace, and divine favor, their accusations start looking increasingly empty and suspicious. This is why many of them will attempt to quietly distance themselves from the situation they helped create, hoping that time will erase their involvement before the truth becomes fully visible. But even this strategy will not protect them forever, because when God decides that something must be revealed, the right circumstances always appear to bring hidden actions into the light. The most important thing for you to remember during this unfolding process is that divine justice does not always appear suddenly. Sometimes it unfolds gradually so that every person involved has the opportunity to show their true character before the final outcome is revealed, and this gradual unfolding ensures that when the truth finally becomes clear, no one can claim they were unfairly judged or misunderstood. So continue walking your path with patience and quiet confidence, because the same God who saw everything that was done against you is still guiding every step of your future, and while your enemies may feel the pressure of time slipping away from them, you are stepping into a season where time itself begins working in your favor. Every day that passes now is moving you closer to a moment when the confusion of the past will finally make sense, when the truth that was hidden will finally become visible, and when the people who once tried to control your story will realize that the ending was never in their hands at all, because the author of your destiny has always been God, and when God decides that a chosen life must rise, no enemy on earth can stop the moment when that rising finally begins. As this season continues to unfold, you will begin to understand something that only a few people truly realize about divine timing, and that is the fact that God never allows injustice to remain permanent in the life of someone He has chosen for a greater purpose, even when it appears for a long time that nothing is changing and that the people who worked against you are living comfortably without consequences. Heaven is never inactive and never unaware, because every moment that seemed silent in your life was actually a moment where God was positioning pieces behind the scenes in ways that human eyes could not yet see. There were nights when you questioned everything, moments when you wondered if speaking the truth even mattered anymore, and seasons when you felt like the weight of misunderstanding was simply too heavy to carry. But despite those feelings, you kept moving forward step by step, holding on to the quiet belief that one day the truth would find its way into the light. And that quiet perseverance is exactly why your story is now approaching a turning point that your enemies never expected. The people who tried to delay your progress believed they had already secured their victory. They assumed that enough time had passed for the situation to fade into the background of everyone's memory, and they convinced themselves that the version of events they created would eventually become the only story people remembered. But what they failed to understand is that truth has a patience far greater than deception. And while lies may move quickly in the beginning, truth always arrives with a power that cannot be erased once it appears. Right now, many of the same individuals who once felt confident in their actions are beginning to sense that something is shifting around them, because the circumstances that once protected them are slowly losing their stability. Relationships that once supported their narrative are becoming uncertain. Conversations that once favored them are now filled with hesitation. And the environment that once allowed them to operate freely is beginning to change in ways that they cannot fully control. This is what it looks like when time begins running out for people who tried to interfere with a destiny they never had the authority to touch, because when God decides that a chosen life must move forward, the barriers that once seemed permanent begin breaking apart one by one. Sometimes quietly and sometimes suddenly, but always in a way that leads the truth closer to the surface. You may start noticing that the same people who once ignored you or treated you unfairly begin showing subtle signs of discomfort whenever your name is mentioned, and this reaction is not accidental. It is the natural response of individuals who know deep inside that the narrative they help support cannot survive much longer under the light of reality. Some of them may try to pretend nothing ever happened, hoping that silence will protect them from accountability, while others may attempt to reposition themselves in a more favorable light by acting supportive or neutral toward you after previously standing against you. But regardless of how they choose to respond, the truth is already moving in a direction that cannot be reversed. At the same time, God is not only dealing with the people who opposed you, He is also preparing the environment for the next stage of your life, because exposure alone is never the final purpose of divine justice. The greater purpose is restoration. And restoration means that everything which was delayed, blocked, or unfairly taken from you will eventually be replaced with something greater than what you originally lost. This is why the path ahead of you will begin opening in ways that feel almost unbelievable compared to the obstacles you once faced, because the same God who allowed you to walk through seasons of misunderstanding is now preparing moments of clarity that will remind you why those difficult experiences were never meant to destroy you. They were meant to strengthen you for the future that is waiting on the other side of this transition. The wisdom you gained through those painful seasons will now become one of your greatest strengths, because you have learned how to recognize the difference between genuine support and hidden agendas. You have learned how to remain steady even when circumstances feel unfair, and you have learned how to trust God in moments when visible evidence seemed completely absent. These lessons are not small things, chosen one. They are the very qualities that prepare someone to step into a larger purpose without becoming distracted or corrupted by the opinions of others, and this is why the next chapter of your life will look very different from the chapters you have already lived through. The people who once believed they had the power to control your story will soon realize that their influence was never as permanent as they imagined, because once God begins elevating a chosen person, the same voices that tried to suppress them lose the authority they once appeared to have. This does not mean every enemy will suddenly admit what they did or openly apologize for the role they played, because many people prefer protecting their pride rather than confronting their past actions, but the important thing is that their ability to affect your future will disappear completely once the truth becomes clear. Your peace will no longer depend on their approval. Your progress will no longer depend on their decisions, and your reputation will no longer depend on the stories they once spread, because when God clears the path for a chosen life, the influence of past opposition loses its power permanently. And when you finally reach the moment where everything becomes clear, you will look back at the difficult seasons of your life with a completely different perspective, realizing that the betrayal, the delays, and the hidden attacks were never the end of your story. They were only chapters that prepared you for a much greater ending than anyone around you expected. The same people who once assumed you would disappear quietly will witness your continued growth. The same voices that tried to question your character will see the consistency of who you truly are, and the same circumstances that once made you feel trapped will become the very evidence that God was guiding your journey all along. So remain steady during this final stretch of the process, because when enemies begin running out of time, the atmosphere around them often becomes unstable and unpredictable, but none of that instability belongs to you anymore. Your role now is simply to keep moving forward with faith, humility, and confidence in the God who has protected your life from the beginning. Very soon the difference between what people said about you and who you actually are will become impossible to ignore, and when that moment arrives, the truth will speak louder than any defense you could have given yourself, proving once and for all that a chosen life cannot be permanently buried under lies, because when God decides the time has come for the truth to rise, no enemy, no deception, and no hidden plan can stop the light from finally revealing what was always meant to be seen.